Before we begin tonight's quiet journey into forgotten history, if my voice brings you even a little peace, you're welcome to subscribe. It helps me keep making these slow, gentle stories for you. And if you feel comfortable, leave a small comment too. It helps these gentle stories reach more tired souls. Close your eyes and listen to the breathing of the city. Beneath the roar of today's sirens lies a quieter, deeper sound, the echo of steam whistles, the clatter of horse hooves on cobblestone, and the whisper of millions of dreams from a century ago. Tonight, we drift through the veil of time, walking the same streets but in two different worlds, separating the ghosts of 1924 from the shadows of 2024. Water holds memory. Before the skyscrapers scraped the belly of the sky, before the subways carved their veins into the earth, there was the water. Dark, cold, and ancient. For some, this harbor was a golden door. But for others, looking out from the segregated decks of steamships arriving from Barbados, Jamaica, or the Carolinas, the gray mist over New York Harbor in 1924 wasn't just weather, it was a veil of uncertainty. Tonight, we drift through that mist, listening to the forgotten songs of the black dock workers and the heartbeat of a people arriving at a city that wasn't quite ready to love them back. The year is 1924. If you were to stand at the edge of the Battery in Lower Manhattan, the air would taste different than it does today. It was heavier, thick with the smell of burning bituminous coal, salt brine, and raw, unrefined oil. The harbor was not a place of leisure. It was a factory of movement. In the distance, through the heavy fog that often settled on the Hudson, you would hear the low, mournful groans of the great ocean liners. But for the Black History observer, our eyes are not fixed on the luxury liners carrying European aristocrats. We are looking for the smaller, rusted vessels, or the segregated third-class steerage of the ships coming up from the Caribbean. This was the era of a quiet but powerful transformation. While the Great Migration was bringing thousands of African Americans from the rural South by train, a different stream was entering from the sea. Afro-Caribbean immigrants from Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados were navigating these gray waters. They stood on the decks, gripping the icy railings, staring at the Statue of Liberty. To them, Lady Liberty was a complex symbol. They knew the stories that the broken chains at her feet, invisible from the water, represented the abolition of slavery. Yet, as they sailed past her copper gaze in 1924, they saw a city divided. The mist swirled around the statue like a ghost, hiding her expression. Was she welcoming, or was she indifferent? Down on the docks, the symphony of the harbor was percussion and grunt work. The men who kept this massive global engine running were often black men. Stevedores and longshoremen, their breath visible in the freezing morning air, hefted crates of bananas, coffee, and machinery. Their muscles were the gears of the city's economy. In 1924, there were no shipping containers, no robotic cranes. Every pound of cargo was moved by human hands. If you listen closely to the echoes of 1924, you might hear a specific whisper among the waves, the Black Star Line, although Marcus Garvey's shipping line was facing turmoil by 1924. Its spirit still haunted the harbor. It was a dream that had floated on these very waters, a dream of black ownership, of ships captained by black men, connecting New York to Africa and the Caribbean. That dream was suspended in the mist, a phantom fleet that lived in the hearts of the people watching the horizon. Let us walk deeper into the 1924 vignette. The water below is churning, black and oily. Tugboats, like angry terriers, push massive steel hulls against the piers. The noise is deafening, steam whistles screaming, chains rattling against iron bollards. For a black family arriving from the south on a coastal steamer, stepping onto the solid ground of Manhattan was a moment of terrifying awe. They carried shabby suitcases tied with string, filled with Bibles, family quilts, and the dust of Georgia or Alabama. The skyline they saw was not the glass canyon of today. It was a jagged range of limestone and brick. The Woolworth building stood like a cathedral of commerce, but to the new arrival, it looked like a fortress. There was a mystery in the streets near the harbor. The cobblestones were slick with manure and oil. Shadows stretched long in the gaslight that still lingered in older corners. The city felt ancient, even then. For the black traveler, navigating this space meant knowing where you could walk, where you could eat, and which eyes to avoid. The gray veil wasn't just the fog. It was the psychological barrier of the Jim Crow era, which, while softer in the north, still hung over the city like a damp chill. Now let the mist clear. Let the timeline dissolve. We open our eyes in 2024. The air is surprisingly cleaner, smelling of ozone and the salty Atlantic, stripped of the heavy coal smoke. The harbor has quieted. The roar of industry has been replaced by the hum of tourism and the soft churn of commuter ferries. We're black. Stevedores once broke their backs lifting sacks of sugar. Joggers of every color now run along the Battery Park Esplanade. The piers, once dangerous, dark, and rat-infested zones of labor, are now parks and playgrounds. But look at the water again. The spirit of 1924 remains. Today, the Staten Island ferry cuts through the same currents. On board, you see the descendants of those 1924 arrivals. A nurse from Brooklyn, a student from Queens, a construction worker from the Bronx. The demographic of the harbor has shifted. The faces looking out at Lady Liberty today are truly global, but the black presence is rooted, established, and powerful. The black history of the harbor today is not just about arrival. It is about ownership and remembrance. Near the tip of Manhattan, just blocks from where the ships docked, lies the African Burial Ground National Monument. In 1924, this sacred site was buried under concrete, forgotten by the white city leaders. Today, it is reclaimed. The ancestors who built the early city are acknowledged. The contrast is striking in its silence. In 1924, the harbor screamed with the desperation of survival. Men fought for day labor tickets. Families prayed they wouldn't be sent back due to illness. The anxiety was palpable, a vibrating frequency in the air. In 2024, the harbor feels like a museum piece. It is majestic, but the desperate struggle has moved inland. The water is a backdrop for selfies, not a barrier to freedom. Yet, for the deep listener, the mystery remains. If you stand by the rail of a modern ferry and look down into the dark green water, you are looking at the same substance that carried the Black Star Line dreams. The water is the only thing that hasn't changed. It is the eternal witness. Gray Veil of 1924 was a fog of industrial struggle and racial uncertainty. The gray veil of 2024 is the fog of forgetfulness. We forget that this view was once terrifying. We forget that for a black man in 1924, standing at the harbor meant he had survived the journey. But the real fight for dignity in the concrete jungle was just beginning. As the sun sets on our first chapter, the lady in the harbor raises her torch. In 1924, she was a beacon of potential disappointment. In 2024, she is a survivor of history, much like the community that flourished despite the odds. The mist rolls in again, connecting the two centuries, wrapping the city in a blanket of sleep, whispering the stories of those who came by sea. Imagine standing on a beam of iron no wider than a church pew, suspended 800 feet above the pavement. There is no safety harness hugging your chest. There is no net below to catch you. There is only the wind, howling like a jealous spirit, and the heat of a red-hot rivet flying through the air toward your bucket. This was the terrifying ballet of 1924. While the city slept, men of steel danced with death to build the sky. Listen closely. Can you hear the hammer's rhythm? To understand the New York of the Roaring Twenties, you must first understand the noise. It was a time when the city decided to conquer the heavens. But before the gold-leafed lobbies and velvet ropes appeared, There was only the raw, violent symphony of iron. For the black historian looking back, the construction sites of the 1920s present a complex puzzle. The popular images of the era, the famous photos of men eating lunch on a steel beam, often show white faces or Mohawk ironworkers. But look closer into the shadows of the construction yard. Listen to the cadence of the work songs. Many African American men, part of the Great Migration, brought with them the skills of the southern foundries from the ironworks of Birmingham, Alabama, and the steel mills of Pittsburgh. Yet, in 1924 New York, the unions were high walls, often harder to climb than the steel skeletons themselves, while systemic racism frequently kept black workers off the high steel riveting gangs. They were the masters of the foundation. They were the Sandhogs working in high-pressure caissons deep underwater to anchor these towers to the bedrock. They were the hod carriers, balancing impossible loads of brick and mortar on their shoulders, climbing endless ladders before the elevators were installed. However, in the chaos of the boom, lines sometimes blurred. On non-union jobs or in the heat of a deadline, black skilled laborers found themselves high above the city. Imagine a man named Elijah, a fictional representation of these unsung builders. He stands on the 40th floor of what will become an Art Deco masterpiece. The process of riveting was a four-man operation, a deadly game of catch. The heater, often a young man, heating a steel rivet in a coal forge until it glowed a cherry red. 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the picture. He picks up the molten bullet with tongs and literally throws a piece of burning metal 50 feet across the open air. The catcher. Waiting on the beam with a tin bucket, he catches the flying fire. The gunman. He jams the rivet into the hole and hammers it shut with a pneumatic gun. The sound was not a thud. It was a machine gun rattle that echoed off the brick canyons. Rat-a-tat-tat. For the black worker involved in this symphony, every rivet was a defiance of gravity and a defiance of a society that said he belonged on the ground. The buildings rising in this era, the Chrysler Building, the Empire State, were not just offices. They were temples. They were designed with Art Deco flair, geometric shapes, sunburst patterns, and gargoyles that looked like radiator caps. To the sleep-seeking audience, visualize the sheer weight of these materials. Today, we build with light aluminum and composite. Back then, they clad the steel in heavy limestone and brick. A black mason, attending to the facade of a skyscraper, was laying thousands of bricks a day. There was a mystery in the skeletons of these buildings. It was said that the wind sang different songs through the open beams, depending on the floor you were on. At the 20th floor, it whistled. At the 60th floor, it screamed. And at the top, where the air was thin, the silence was deafening. For the black workers hauling materials up the hoists, the vertical city was a paradox. They were building penthouses they would never be allowed to live in. They were constructing offices for businesses that would not hire them as clerks. Yet, their sweat is literally in the mortar. The iron rusts, but the connection holds. Every time you look at the spire of the Chrysler Building, you are looking at the frozen labor of a generation that worked without safety nets. Now, let the timeline shift. The roar of the pneumatic hammer fades. We are standing at Hudson Yards, or Billionaire's Row. In 2024, the skyline has changed. The stone giants of the past are now surrounded by slender, silent needles of glass. Modern construction is a library compared to the factory floor of 1924. Today, there are no rivets. The beams are bolted together with high-strength tension bolts. The sound is a low whir of electric wrenches, not the violent percussion of air hammers. The demographic on the high steel has shifted too. If you look at a job site in 2024, the black history narrative is one of progress, though the struggle continues. You will see black project managers, black safety inspectors, and black crane operators. The unions, once fortresses of exclusion, are now diverse. Though the legacy of the past still casts a shadow, The danger has been sanitized. The skywalkers of today wear full-body harnesses clipped to safety lines. They are surrounded by safety netting. The thrill of death is gone, replaced by the efficiency of insurance policies. But the most striking difference is the skin of the buildings. In 1924, the buildings absorbed the light. They were made of rock and earth. In 2024, the buildings reflect the light. They are made of mirrors as standing on the street today. Looking up at One Vanderbilt or the Central Park Tower, you don't feel the weight of the building. They look ethereal, like they might float away. But the 1924 buildings, they look like they are gripping the earth with claws. As you drift towards sleep, think of the connection between the rivet and the bolt. In the 1920s, a topping out ceremony when the last beam was placed was a patriotic event, often with an American flag. For the black workers, who were often excluded from the photo ops, the satisfaction was internal. It was the knowledge that they knew the building would stand. There's a legend among old iron workers that the steel retains the heat of the day it was forged. If you touch the rivets of an old bridge or a pre-war skyscraper on a cold night, they say it feels warmer than the surrounding air. Maybe it's physics. Or maybe, for our audience tonight, it's the lingering energy of the men who heated those rivets. The men who came from the cotton fields of the South to the steel canyons of the North. They didn't just build offices. They built the skyline of the American dream, even when they were denied a key to the front door. The symphony of iron is now a whisper. The city has grown tall, sleek, and quiet. But deep inside the walls, the iron bones still hum with the rhythm of 1924. Rat-a-tat-tat. Rat-a-tat-tat. Sleep now, in the shadow of the giants. The city breathes, not just in the rush of air between its towers, but in the dark, damp silence of the earth below. Tonight, we descend from the glittering steel of the skyline into the cold, ancient schist rock upon which New York is built. Listen for the ghost train running on forgotten rails. For many generations of black New Yorkers, the city's underground was more than transit. It was the ultimate metaphor, a hidden, roaring path that led from the visible world of segregation into the promise of Harlem's night. Welcome to the subterranean heart. Beneath the manicured lawn of City Hall Park, New York holds a secret. It is a chamber of curved architecture and silent beauty. A cathedral dedicated to velocity. In 1924, the Interborough Rapid Transit (IRT) subway system was still a young, miraculous entity, having opened just 2 decades prior. It was an engineering marvel, designed not just for utility, but for public awe. The most exquisite example of this pride was the original City Hall station. Imagine the scene: the vaulted ceiling, tiled with warm, shining guastavino arches, the same technique used in Grand Central's Oyster Bar. Sunlight poured through vaulted skylights set into the pavement above. Brass chandeliers dripped light onto platforms curved like the rim of a massive teacup. This was transportation as art. But by 1924, this very station was already on the path to obsolescence. Its platforms were too short for the longer trains the system required. Its beauty was too inefficient for the city's frantic pace. It was a secret tucked away, a luxurious tomb for an era's ambition. For the black rider in 1924, the subway was a lifeline. Surface transit trolleys, buses could be rife with microaggressions, uncomfortable social codes, and often outright racial hostility. But underground, on the IRT, the sheer speed and anonymity offered a specific kind of freedom. The trains roared out of Lower Manhattan, carrying black laborers from the docks and domestic workers from service jobs. The tunnels ran straight toward the magnetic promise of Harlem. The 135th Street station became a true terminus, a gateway to the Renaissance. Built on iron and speed. The mystery of the subway goes deeper than the elegant tiling. It lies in the metaphor of its creation. The digging itself was a feat of unparalleled, brutal labor. The Sandhogs, the men who dug the tunnels, worked in pressurized caissons beneath the rivers, risking crippling decompression sickness, the bends, to anchor the city's transit. Many of these Sandhogs were Black and Irish laborers, doing the work that required immense physical courage for minimal pay. The weight of Manhattan, the schist, the pre-existing utility lines all rested on their hands. For the Black history perspective, the concept of a modern subterranean journey immediately evokes the Underground Railroad. Though the subway was a network of steel, not safe houses, it served the same profound purpose for the Great Migration: safe, rapid passage north, away from the visible, restrictive world. The deep rumble of the train, often described as a subterranean beast, was the sound of momentum. It was the sound of a family moving their future from the shadow of the South to the promise of the North, all while shielded by the deep earth. Now, let the roar of the modern MTA train shake us back to 2024. The subway is no longer a palace of light. It is a vast, rattling, often delayed labyrinth. It is functional, chaotic, and relentlessly noisy. The mosaics are covered in grime, the light is harsh fluorescent, and the air is thick with the smell of brake dust and humanity. The beauty of the City Hall station remains, but you can only glimpse it as a ghost. The train circles slowly through the abandoned platform as it turns around. It is a silent memory, a historical relic bypassed by the urgent reality of modern traffic. Yet, in its modern chaos, the subway remains the great integrating force. A crowded train or four-train platform is a true cross-section of the African diaspora in New York. You stand shoulder to shoulder with people whose families trace back to Harlem, Ghana, Haiti, and Guyana. The subway, built on the invisible labor of the past, now transports the full, vibrant diversity of the present. It is no longer a path to Harlem, but a pathway through every neighborhood that Black New Yorkers have shaped. As we conclude this descent, consider the permanent sound that links the two centuries: the deep, constant drone of the moving train. In 1924, the sound promised arrival, work, and escape. In 2024, the sound signifies continuation, resilience, and the relentless pulse of a city that cannot afford to stop. The mystery of the subway is this: it runs on the same iron, laid by the same hard hands, cutting through the same Manhattan schist. The tunnels are the city's memory bank, quietly holding the secrets of its foundation and the thousands of untold stories of migration and movement. Sleep now, suspended between the forgotten beauty of the past and the rattling urgency of the present, carried by the shadows beneath the streets. The night is a canvas for history. In 1924, when the sun surrendered its hold on Manhattan, the darkness that descended was not total. It was a deep velvet blue, punctuated by thousands of tiny, flickering human efforts. This was the era before perpetual light, when shadows were long and held secrets of speakeasies, secrets of poverty, and most importantly, the luminous, unforgettable secrets of the Harlem Renaissance. Tonight, we trace the path from the soft amber sigh of the gas lamp to the harsh, cold glare of the neon sign, listening to the culture that glowed between the extremes. To walk the residential streets of New York in 1924 was to experience a specific quality of darkness that no longer exists. City was unevenly lit. Downtown, the wealthy residential streets still relied on gaslight, often housed in elegant fixtures. The light source itself was the Welsbach mantle, which emitted a soft hissing, yellowish-green glow. This light was intimate. It cast long dancing shadows, turning brownstones into mysterious, slightly menacing shapes. It was light that encouraged whispers, not shouts. On the main commercial avenues, the harsh new arc lights were beginning to take over. These early electric lamps were blinding, sputtering, and blue-white. casting a strange, harsh pallor over everything. They looked like small, artificial moons. This conflict, the warm, ancient gas versus the cold. Modern electric was the visual reality of the city's transition, for the new arrivals of the Great Migration. The intensity of the northern city's light was often overwhelming. Many came from the deep south, where night was defined by the profound darkness of rural areas, broken only by candlelight or kerosene. The endless urban glow of New York, even in its 1924 infancy, was a symbol of modernity and opportunity, a promise that darkness could be conquered. The story of light takes its most profound turn when we journey uptown to Harlem. In the 1920s, Harlem wasn't just a neighborhood. It was the epicenter of a cultural earthquake. Here, the illumination served a purpose beyond mere navigation. It was a beacon, the electric light in Harlem's apartments, brownstones, and community centers was used to read Langston Hughes, to type the manifestos of W.E.B. Du Bois, and to study the philosophies of Marcus Garvey. The light over the desk, powered by Edison's genius, was fueling black intellectual thought and political organization. But the real magic happened in the cultural hubs. Think of the Savoy Ballroom or the countless small smoky speakeasies that dotted the avenues. Inside, the light was deliberately low wattage, filtering through tobacco smoke and bouncing off polished wooden floors. This wasn't the harsh light of Times Square. This was the golden glow of creation. It created the perfect atmosphere for the music. The saxophone player, bathed in a solitary, warm spotlight, and the dancers, moving in the intimate dimness, felt a sense of freedom and ownership. Even though many of the most famous clubs, like the Cotton Club, were racially segregated in their audience policies, the talent, the source of the light and energy was purely black. The darkness outside made the light inside feel all the more vital and precious. Contrast this intimate Harlem warmth with the brutal commercialism of Broadway. By 1924, Times Square was already becoming the Great White Way. It was a chaotic explosion of electric signs, marquees, and early neon. This was light as advertisement, light as spectacle. It was engineered to assault the senses and demand attention. For black performers who had to work downtown, this light was often a mixed blessing. They stood under the blinding spotlights, singing for audiences who might cheer their art, but refuse them service in a nearby restaurant. The powerful light of Broadway exposed them, making their talent visible to the world, but it did not necessarily sanctify them. It was a cold, unforgiving light that highlighted the city's racial hypocrisy. The neon glow promised equality, but the shadows between the buildings held the reality of segregation. Now, shift forward 100 years. The night, as the ancestors knew it, is gone. In 2024, New York is bathed in the relentless, 24/7 glare of LED and high-intensity neon. The light is efficient, sustainable, and cold. There are no flickering shadows to dance in. There is no mysterious amber glow to hide secrets. The entire city is lit like a surgical theater. This is the tyranny of permanent daylight. The aesthetic mystery of the old city, the ability of gaslight to soften harsh reality, is erased. We sacrifice poetry for visibility. The historical consequence for the Black history narrative is that the light of 2024 no longer needs to be searched for. It is pervasive. The descendants of the Harlem Renaissance writers and musicians own the intellectual and cultural landscape. Their visibility is mandatory, not earned through a hidden glow. However, in losing the deep shadows, we lose the memory of what was fought for. The modern LED light, cold and white, doesn't carry the warmth of the old gaslight, which once stood guard over the hopeful, dangerous passage of time. The night no longer belongs to history. It belongs to commerce. Sleep now, under the blanket of eternal artificial light, and remember the warmth of the shadows they fought through. Every city lives two lives after dusk. The visible life, guided by streetlights and the schedules of commerce. And the hidden life, tucked away behind unmarked doors and thick velvet curtains. In 1924, this hidden world was powered by two things: illegality and rhythm. The rhythmic, hot sound of black culture was the currency that bought passage into the deepest secrets of Manhattan. Tonight, we listen for the muffled bass line of an illegal trumpet, tracing the journey from the cellar's chill to the open, indifferent air of the modern sky. The journey into the New York night of 1924 required a precise sequence of actions. You left the dimly lit street, perhaps stepped over an alley grate, and found an unmarked door off in the back, entrance of a defunct restaurant or a seemingly innocent brownstone basement. You did not knock. You used the code. 3 light taps, then a pause, then 2 sharp taps. The tiny peephole would slide open, a nervous eye would examine your shoes, your hat, your face. The fear was real. A police raid, or worse, a visit from rival gangs controlling the liquor supply. This atmosphere of adrenaline and necessary secrecy was the defining texture of the SPEAKEASY. The descent was everything. Going down a narrow, often moldy staircase. You were leaving the visible world of segregated, polite society and entering a secret space where the rules of the surface, momentarily warped. The air in the basement was thick and layered. The scent of cheap bathtub gin, often tainted or industrial alcohol, cigarette smoke, and the deep, inescapable sweat of a crowd packed too close. Yet, the air was also electric. The heart of every speakeasy, both downtown and uptown, was the music. And that music was jazz, blues, and ragtime, the incomparable, accelerating sound of Black America. The speakeasy was an economic and social paradox. While the patrons risked arrest for alcohol consumption, the performers, often black pioneers like Fletcher, Henderson, or Bessie Smith, risked harassment and exploitation for their art. They were the engine of the national culture, generating the heat and rhythm that made the whole illegal enterprise profitable. In Harlem, the speakeasy was a cultural sanctuary. Clubs like the Lafayette Theater's basement or small, unpublicized spots were places where the intellectual energy of the Renaissance met the raw, improvisational genius of the music. Here, for a few hours, black patrons and the occasional white slumming patron could mingle in a manner unthinkable on the streets. The darkness and the illegality acted as a strange equalizer, temporarily dissolving the rigid social geometry of the day. The music was a physical force. The sound of the muted brass, the steady walking bass line, and the syncopated drum beat was a defiant declaration of life in a time of political oppression. The whispers behind the door were not just secrets about gin. They were cultural secrets about identity, power, and art. The music was the only thing that felt completely legal and true in that false environment. Now, we ascend 100 years. We leave the sticky basement floor and take a high-speed elevator 60 stories up. In 2024, the party is on the rooftop. The atmosphere is one of deliberate exposure. The view is the central feature, the blinding 24/7 LED panorama of the vertical city. The drinks are legal, meticulously crafted, and expensive. There is no secret knock. There are only velvet ropes and reservations. The air is clean, controlled, and open. The anxiety is gone, replaced by the cool confidence of disposable income. The music today is ambient. It is often a digitized, soft-focus echo of the very jazz and blues that once risked imprisonment to be played. The sound no longer feels dangerous. It feels like background. The modern rooftop bar symbolizes the ultimate triumph of visibility. Everything is legal, open, and cataloged. This openness is a societal victory for the descendants of those 1924 musicians, who now own the intellectual capital that defines the city's nightlife. But in its perfect legality, the rooftop has lost the mystery and the adrenaline that made the speakeasy a sacred space. The profound historical irony is that the patrons of 1924 had to descend into the earth to find the truth, while the patrons of 2024 ascend into the sky to find a sanitized version of leisure. The speakeasy forced intimacy and exchange. The shared danger made strangers all eyes. The rooftop promotes isolation. Individuals gaze outwards at the view rather than inwards at each other. The walls of the speakeasy were thick, holding in the sound of revolutionary music. The walls of the rooftop bar are made of glass, reflecting the city's perpetual glare. As we drift towards sleep, listen to the contrast, the muffled, vital, dangerous whispers of the basement and the open, clear, indifferent chatter of the sky. The true sound of New York's history lies in the bass line of a Louis Armstrong record. A sound so powerful it had to be played in secret just to survive. The city of iron and glass is ultimately at the mercy of the wind. In the deep winter of 1924, the cold was not a season. It was an antagonist. It found every crack in the tenement window, froze every outdoor water pipe, and most powerfully, it stole the livelihood of the working man. Tonight, we listen to the sound of the wind sweeping across a vast, terrifying plain of white ice, the frozen Hudson River. We are tracing the path of the ancestors who escaped the economic cold of the South, only to find the bone-deep, hungry cold of the northern winter. This is the sound of survival, muffled by snow. The New York winter of a century ago was a brutal, ancient event. The density of coal smoke from millions of chimneys often mixed with the heavy snowfall, coating the city in a dark, gray-white soot. The cold was a structural component of life, demanding respect and fear. For the historical observer, the most profound symbol of this bygone severity was the Hudson River, though its complete freezing was becoming rarer by the 1920s. The sight of massive, jagged ice flows, sometimes solid enough near the banks for children to venture out, was common. The river, the lifeblood of the city's commerce, became a static, terrifying plain of white. The black dock workers, the stevedores and longshoremen discussed in Chapter 1, were immediately impacted. When the Hudson froze, the coastal and ocean-going steamers could not dock. The lifeline of work ceased. For men reliant on daily wages, the ice meant not just cold, but economic famine. The ancient cold of nature mirrored the structural economic cold of the era. For the vast number of African, American, and Caribbean migrants who had settled in Harlem, the northern winter presented a unique and cruel hardship. They had fled the low-wage agricultural economy of the South, only to find themselves paying exorbitant rents for housing that offered little protection against the elements. In the crowded, multi-family tenements, heating was a constant, exhausting struggle. The coal struggle. Heat often came from a single small coal stove in the kitchen. Obtaining the coal was a daily task. The smell of burning coal dust was the pervasive scent of winter survival. Families huddled close, wrapping themselves in every blanket brought from the South. Water and ice, frozen pipes were a constant threat. In cold water flats, water often had to be retrieved from outside pumps or faucets, now slick with dangerous ice. The struggle to boil water for washing, cooking, and sanitation was an act of constant physical labor against the weather. The drafts. The buildings were old. The walls were thin, and the window sashes rattled constantly. The wind, a biting, relentless sound, was a third occupant in every room. Families resorted to stuffing rags, newspapers, and even old clothing into the window gaps. The mystery of this era lies in the fact that this crushing cold was often the most powerful and unexpected form of northern resistance. The black community had to invent new forms of internal communal warmth, sharing coal scraps and stove space, just to survive the season. In 1924, snow removal was rudimentary. When a massive storm hit, the city simply stopped. The elevated train lines, the L, became the only reliable transit. The streets were choked with massive drifts. forcing everyone regardless of social standing to walk through icy trenches. The sound of 1924 winter was one of damp, grinding silence, occasionally broken by the squeak of heavy leather boots on frozen snow or the crunch of the ice wagon, delivering blocks to keep food cold, even in the dead of winter. The Iceman was crucial. The Black history perspective on this frieze is about resilience. It was proof that the hopes carried north were strong enough to withstand even the most merciless forces of nature. That cold created a communal strength necessary for the political and cultural fights of the following springs. Let us fast forward to 2024. The winters are markedly different. Climate change has softened the extremes. The Hudson River, even in the coldest months, rarely sees the massive, intimidating ice formations of a century ago. The threat of a completely frozen harbor is almost a forgotten legend. The city's response to snow is immediate and efficient. Massive plows, salt trucks, and sophisticated drainage systems quickly turn the beautiful white snow into slush gray. Transient nuisance that signifies rapid cleanup rather than existential threat. The mystery is gone. The ancient, terrifying power of nature has been domesticated by engineering and climate shift. In 2024, the struggle for heat persists for lower-income communities. But the challenge is primarily economic, high utility bills, rather than physical, lack of adequate coal supply. The old tenement draft has been replaced by the modern anxiety of energy costs. As we drift towards sleep, remember the difference between the ice of 1924 and the slush of 2024. The ice was powerful, unforgiving, and stopped the world. The slush is weak, messy, and merely slows the world down for a few hours. The strength required to survive the historical cold is the enduring inheritance of the community that stayed and thrived. Every palace has a back door. Fifth Avenue in 1924 was paved with the gold leaf of the Gilded Age, its western side lined with chateaux, palazzi, and mansions built on the scale of European royalty. But the real history of these stone fortresses was not held in the silk and velvet of the ballrooms. It was held in the silent, narrow passage of the back staircases. Tonight we walk that path, the journey of the invisible staff. The black men and women whose labor maintained the illusion of effortless wealth, carrying the secrets of the masters up and down the silent mahogany stairs. The houses of the Vanderbilts, the Astors and the Carnegies were not built to be homes. They were built to be declarations. Standing on Fifth Avenue near 59th Street in 1924, you would see architecture of crushing weight, French chateaux, Italianate villas, and Romanesque mansions, all clad in granite, marble, and limestone. Inside, the environment was one of constant, hushed opulence. The air smelled of beeswax polish, old tobacco smoke, and expensive cologne. The rooms were museums of excess, walls covered in brocade, ceilings coffered and painted by European artists, floors made of priceless polished porphyry. The prevailing feeling was silence, a silence so heavy it felt like a fifth wall. This silence was not natural. It was engineered. It was the silence required of the domestic staff, the essential, invisible workforce whose job it was to ensure that the owners never had to see the mechanics of their own existence. This is where the Black history perspective becomes crucial. The system of domestic service relied heavily on African American labor, particularly those coming from the sophisticated but segregated service traditions of the South, and Afro-Caribbean immigrants who brought meticulous standards from island cultures. The mansion was, therefore, two distinct worlds: the front of house, marble, light, open space, controlled by the masters; the back of house, utility, heat, cramped quarters, controlled by the head butler or cook. The physical symbol of this apartheid was the back staircase. While the owners swept up the main staircase wide, marble, and carpeted, the staff used a staircase that was narrow, steep, uncarpeted, and often deliberately placed next to the hot, rattling pipes. This was the vertical highway for the labor of the house, Imagine the black butler or footman perfectly dressed, impeccably silent. He was the most educated observer in the house, seeing the scandals, the financial anxieties, and the hypocrisy of the white elite. He polished the silver, served the forbidden wine during Prohibition, and managed the flow of secrets, all while living in an attic room, the gilded cage for the staff, that was freezing in winter and stifling in summer. The cook, often a black woman. She was the engine of the kitchen. Her skill combining Southern techniques with formal French cuisine created the extravagant banquets. Yet she ate separately in a small utilitarian dining room, tasting the food she prepared only to ensure its perfection. The mystery of the Gilded Age is not how the wealth was spent, but how the immense, vital, human story of the labor that sustained it was completely erased from the public record. By the 1920s, many of these grand mansions were already becoming white elephants. The cost of coal to heat the 80-room buildings, the taxes, and the huge staff required were unsustainable for the next generation. The crash of 1929 was merely the final loud gasp for structures that were already dying. In the late 1920s and early 1930s, Fifth Avenue witnessed a tragic demolition. The mansions were not preserved. They were simply torn down to make way for commercial buildings and, later, modern apartments. The marble, the velvet, the crushing weight of stone all reduced to dust and rubble. The ghosts of the servants who knew every corner of those houses were suddenly left without a home, carrying the memory of that hidden, glittering world into the tenements of Harlem. Now, contrast that with 2024. The Fifth Avenue mansions are gone, replaced by sleek, vertical towers, crowned by minimalist penthouses. The atmosphere is one of transparency and technology. The owner looks out at the city, not in at his possessions. There is no need for a dedicated staff quarters. Cleaning, cooking, and service are outsourced or mechanized. The building is automated. The modern Gilded Cage is one of isolation. The owner has a better view, but is disconnected from the life of the city and the humanity of labor. The true historical silence of the 2024 penthouse is the lack of any permanent, domestic voice. The silent historian is gone. As we drift towards sleep, remember that true wealth is measured not by the size of the ballroom, but by the dignity afforded to the men and women who cleaned the kitchen. The mansions are gone, but the history of the back staircase remains the final, enduring mystery of Fifth Avenue. Every city's true biography is written not in its stone skyscrapers, but in the peeling paint and damp plaster of its oldest apartments. The most enduring ghost of the New York of 1924 is its smell. Tonight, we follow the pungent trail of coal dust, lye soap, and boiling sustenance into the heart of the Harlem tenement kitchen. It was here, in a space barely larger than a modern closet, that the dreams of the Great Migration were cooked, heated, and fiercely protected. This is a tale of two kitchens, one built for survival, and one built for solitude. For the thousands of black families pouring into New York during the Great Migration, Harlem offered the promise of cultural liberation, but its housing offered the reality of brutal economics. The tenements, often older, pre-war buildings, converted into multifamily units, were crowded, dark, and criminally expensive due to discriminatory double rents. The kitchen was the undisputed engine room of the 1924 tenement apartment. It was the largest source of heat, the primary workspace, and often, by necessity, a bedroom for the children. Heat. The kitchen was dominated by the coal or wood-burning stove. Its presence was a blessing and a curse. It kept the family from freezing in the harsh New York winter, as discussed in Chapter 6. But it coated everything in a fine, greasy layer of coal dust. Smell. The aroma was dense, complex, and culturally profound. It was the scent of survival cooking. Southern collard greens simmered for hours, the pungent spice of Caribbean rice and peas, the sharpness of vinegar, and the pervasive smell of lye soap used for weekly washing. These were the aromas of a people fusing regional identities into a new urban culture. The sound. The kitchen noise was constant. The clanking of the coal grate. The rhythmic scrubbing of clothes in the sink. The low murmur of political discussions and the sounds of neighbors through thin, damp plaster walls. The great mystery of the 1924 tenement kitchen was its capacity. It housed multiple generations, nurtured future writers and artists, and sustained the spirit of a community, all within its tiny, sweating walls. The high rents and discriminatory practices forced families into a pattern of severe overcrowding. Sometimes, families were forced to take in lodgers to meet the landlord's demands, or entire extended families lived in rooms meant for two. The walls of the tenement held silent agreements. The forced silence when the landlord or rent collector came was a survival mechanism, feigning less occupancy to avoid further exploitation. The true history of these walls is not the architecture, but the intense collective struggle waged daily against cold, hunger, and confinement. The tenement kitchen, with its lack of modern ventilation and its single coal stove, was the focal point of all that heat and chaos, making it both a crucible of community and a constant health hazard. Now, shift forward 100 years. We walk into the same building, perhaps the same exact room, now marketed as a historic, charming studio. The kitchen of 2024 is the antithesis of its ancestor. It is small, but designed for solitude and convenience. The look: stainless steel appliances, granite countertops and pristine, white painted walls. The smell: the air is sterile, often dominated by the faint, expensive aroma of single-origin coffee or takeout from a nearby organic market. The smell of laborious survival cooking is gone, replaced by the quick, easy scent of consumerism. The sound: this is profound. The walls, though still thin, separate neighbors who barely speak. The sound of life is mediated through headphones and digital screens. The true historical tragedy is that the space that was too small for one family in 1924 is now deemed perfectly sized and aggressively priced for one professional in 2024. The gentrification has preserved the shell of the building while utterly erasing the cultural, working-class soul of the interior. The tale of these two kitchens is a lesson in urban history. The 1924 kitchen was a site of material hunger mitigated by communal warmth. The 2024 kitchen is a site of material abundance, sometimes marred by communal coldness and economic exclusion. For those who founded the neighborhood, the deepest mystery beneath the polished floorboards is the lingering presence of those strong aromas, the ghosts of collard greens, the faint heat of the coal, the whispers of the lodgers. The fight for space and dignity, once waged with a coal shovel and a saucepan, is now fought with mortgages and rent hikes. The street is a massive, living drum, and history is the sound of its rhythm changing. Forget the smell of gasoline. The definitive aroma of New York in 1924 was organic, earthy, and pervasive. It was the scent of the animal that drove this city, the horse. Tonight, we listen to the chaotic grinding sound where iron-shod hooves met the sputtering combustion engine. And we trace the lineage of labor, the black carters, stable hands, and haulers whose forgotten work allowed the city to move, grow, and ultimately evolve beyond them. In 1924, New York was caught in a tense, smelly transition. The automobile was rising, but the horse had not yet surrendered. The street was a noisy, unpredictable ecosystem shared by two vastly different modes of power. The dominant sounds were the clip-clop of hooves, thousands of them, iron-shod, striking cobblestone and asphalt interspersed with the grinding of iron carriage wheels. The rhythm was halting, organic, and often brutal. The most inescapable sensory reality was the smell. A city running on horsepower meant the daily production of hundreds of tons of manure and gallons of urine. This pervasive ammonia and earthy scent defined the air quality of the street level. It was the constant, unseen cost of surface movement. The Black history narrative here focuses on the hands that manage this organic chaos. The stables, the delivery services, the garbage hauling, these were sectors where Black men found essential, albeit often low-paid and difficult work. They were the stable hands, the carters, and the teamsters, guiding the heavy delivery wagons through the maze of Manhattan. They knew the streets, the horses, and the shortcuts better than any white-collar broker. Their labor was dirty, vital, and immediately disposable if a machine could replace it. The intersection of the horse and the Model T was a theater of social friction. The horse was reliable, but slow. The Model T Ford and the sputtering early taxi were loud, fast, and constantly breaking down. The early internal combustion engines reeked of acrid, unrefined gasoline and motor oil. The transition was inherently racialized. The emerging jobs around the automobile mechanics, garage owners, and crucially, the newly unionized taxi and bus drivers, often systematically excluded Black workers. The horse and cart became a symbol of the old, low-status economy, while the shiny automobile represented a modern economy that was building new forms of segregation. The speed of the engine, the aggressive honking that replaced the subtle bell of the cart. This was the sound of a city demanding relentless, impersonal acceleration. It was a rhythm that left little room for the patience required to guide a horse or the communal pace of the old neighborhoods. Now, shift forward to 2024. The horse is gone. Relegated only to carriage tours in Central Park, the dominant smell is no longer manure, but the metallic, lingering fumes of exhaust, the ghost of the millions of internal combustion engines that ruled the 20th century. The current sound of the city is the gridlock. The speed promised by the automobile is an illusion, replaced by the deep, continuous frustration of motionless traffic. The roar of the old engine is now giving way to the silent, smooth hum of the electric Uber or the delivery scooter. The city is quieter, but the movement is just as constrained. The Black history narrative continues on these same streets. The carter has been replaced by the gig economy driver and the delivery cyclist, often African American, Caribbean, or African immigrant. The labor is still essential, still poorly compensated relative to the city's cost of living, but now mediated by an algorithm rather than a horsewhip. The struggle for mobility and economic control remains anchored to the ground level. The mystery of New York's traffic is that its goal has never truly changed. Movement. In 1924, movement was constrained by biology, the horse's endurance, and the weather. In 2024, movement is constrained by sheer volume, the number of cars, and infrastructure. As we drift towards sleep, listen to the contrast. The clip-clop was loud, messy, and organic, carrying the scent of life. The electric hum is clean, silent, and impersonal, carrying the scent of commerce. The history of the street tells us that no matter the engine, animal, or electric, the heart of New York's economy rests on the essential, continuous labor of those who ensure its goods and its people can move. Every city must breathe. And for New York, that breath is drawn deep into the heart of Central Park. We call this space a constant, an eternal green lung immune to the ravages of time and commerce. But this constancy is an illusion. Beneath the manicured grass, beneath the ancient schist rock, lies the foundation of a secret, a thriving, resilient community of African American property owners. Tonight, we walk over the silent, sacred ground of Seneca Village, listening for the whispers of homes that were bulldozed for the sake of pastoral beauty. The park is not merely green. It is a monument to a profound historical erasure. To appreciate Central Park in 1924 is to understand the layers of silence it maintains. The park was then only about 60 years old, yet it already felt ancient, a carefully constructed illusion of untouched nature. But the profound mystery of Central Park is that it was not built on wilderness. It was built on displacement. In the 1820s and 1830s, before its creation, the area between 82nd and 88th Streets was home to Seneca Village, an independent community primarily of African American citizens, alongside some Irish and German immigrants. For the Black history audience, Seneca Village is critical. Property ownership in the mid-19th century was tied directly to voting rights. By 1855, about two-thirds of the residents were Black, and many owned their own land, a rare and powerful feat of self-determination in pre-Civil War New York. When the city seized the land through eminent domain in 1857 to build the park, these families were forcibly removed, their churches and schools destroyed, and their legacy scattered. In 1924, when a New Yorker strolled through the Great Lawn, the site of the former village, they walked over the silent, buried foundations of homes. The very piece of the park was purchased with the destruction of a thriving Black community. In 1924, the park was still a place of formal Victorian promenade. The social rules were stricter than today. Sheep Meadow, yes, Sheep Meadow did indeed hold a flock of around 200 Southdown sheep, tended by a solitary shepherd. The soft, placid sound of the sheep grazing, contrasting with the roar of Fifth Avenue just blocks away, lent the park a truly pastoral, almost surreal atmosphere. The tavern on the green was built as a sheepfold for the flock. The promenade, families dressed formally. Leisure was passive, riding in hired carriages often driven by African American men, sitting quietly on benches, and listening to the bandshell concerts. For the Black New Yorker of the Harlem Renaissance era, using the park was an important act of asserting citizenship. While white residents used the park for quiet leisure, Black families often used specific areas like the Harlem Mere or northern sections for large, boisterous, organized picnics and cultural gatherings, openly defying the passive white social expectations. The laughter and music ringing out from these sections was a declaration of belonging. Now, shift to 2024. The serenity is replaced by kinetic energy. The sheep are long gone, removed in 1934. And the Sheep Meadow is now an open field for sunbathers and touch football. The park is no longer a place of passive strolling. It is a space for active exertion. The sound is the slap of running shoes, the high-speed whir of bicycle wheels, and the constant digital pulse of ERBUDS. The modern park is utilitarian, serving the need for stress reduction and exercise in a high-speed world. It is open, diverse, and heavily trafficked by tourists and commuters alike. The mystery of Central Park is that its beauty is a lie of omission. Every time a Black child plays baseball on the Great Lawn, they are running the bases over the ghosts of their ancestors' living rooms. The massive boulders and outcroppings, seemingly untouched by man, were carefully incorporated into the park's design, becoming silent tombstones for the community that was displaced. As we drift towards sleep, remember the profound truth beneath the surface. The park is the ultimate symbol of New York's complicated relationship with land, power, and justice. It is a space of illusory peace built on historical violence. Listen closely to the wind rustling the leaves. It might be the last remaining sound of a village that once thrived there. The eternal green lung is also the city's deepest scar. Every city has a cathedral dedicated not to divinity, but to motion. For New York, that is Grand Central Terminal. Step inside the main concourse and look up. You see a vast vaulted ceiling painted with the constellations of the zodiac, shimmering with electric gold. But this celestial canvas holds a double mystery. Its stars were once hidden behind a century of darkness, and the secrets of the floor were once carried on the shoulders of invisible men. Tonight, we listen for the ghost of the train whistle and the hushed movements of the red-cap porters, the silent historians of the Great Migration. In 1924, Grand Central Terminal was a decade old, a monument to the power of the New York Central Railroad. It was engineered to be a dazzling palace, that would inspire awe and signify the glorious arrival into the northern metropolis. If you looked up at the main concourse ceiling, you would see the celestial map, the stars, the Milky Way, the constellations painted by artist Paul Cesar Helou. But in 1924, that beautiful sky was deeply muted. The source of the darkness was not steam, which had been banned from the terminal tunnels years before, but human vice. The thousands of daily travelers smoking cigars and cigarettes while they waited created a thick, continuous film of nicotine and tobacco soot. The glorious heavens were obscured by a self-imposed man-made cloud. This was the visual reality for the new arrivals. The promise of the North, the stars, was dimmed by the immediate reality of urban life, the smoke. The terminal held another architectural secret, the Whispering Gallery. Just outside the Oyster Bar, the Guastavino arches create a space where a whisper directed into a corner can be heard perfectly across the vast marble floor. In 1924, these corners carried immense secrets, hushed farewells, clandestine business deals, and the nervous whispers of black families arriving from the South, anxious about their next steps in the North. For the Black history perspective, the true heart of Grand Central Terminal was not the clock or the ceiling, but the red-cap porters. These men, identifiable by their bright red caps, were almost exclusively African American, having inherited the labor tradition established by George Pullman. They were the most essential, yet often the most overlooked, element of the entire operation. The burden. They carried the physical burden of the entire migration heavy. Shabby suitcases stuffed with the belongings and hopes of families. They knew the weight of every journey. The knowledge. The porter was the silent gatekeeper. He knew which trains came from the segregated South. He saw the racial indignities endured by black passengers, and he heard the coded conversations between families separating or reuniting. He navigated the complex social topography of the terminal, often guiding black newcomers to the trains or exits most advantageous for them. The red cap. Porter's forced servitude was the invisible price paid for the terminal's smooth operation. While white travelers viewed the space with leisurely awe, the porter saw it as a workplace, a beautiful but segregated space where he had to endure condescension and rely solely on tips for his livelihood. He was the ghost that moved between the grandeur. Fast forward to the 1990s, and the terminal's magnificent restoration. The city realized the grime was a historical tragedy. The ceiling was painstakingly cleaned, revealing the vibrant blue and gold of the original mural. A single small patch of soot was deliberately left above the Oyster Bar ticket booth, as a historical marker, a smudge of the past, reminding millions of travelers how history obscures truth. In 2024, the ceiling is a blinding spectacle. The constellations are clear, though still astronomically incorrect. They are painted backward. The vast space is now illuminated by high-tech lighting, clean and clinical. The sound is that of commuter rush and the digital tap of phones. The red-cap porters are now few in number, largely replaced by efficient ramps, rolling luggage, and technology. The deep, human knowledge they held, the secrets and stories whispered at the gates, is gone. Replaced by the digital, transient knowledge of the traveler's app. The mystery of Grand Central is the same as the city's: what we choose to clean and what we choose to forget. The soot of 1924 was the physical manifestation of human neglect and prejudice hiding the beautiful truth above. The clean ceiling of 2024 reveals the beauty, but hides the arduous human labor that built and sustained the movement below. As you drift towards sleep, remember the silent strength of the men who navigated the terminal with grace and endurance. They carried the luggage and they carried the hope beneath the backwards painted stars. They call it the city that never sleeps. But perhaps a city that never sleeps is not truly awake. It is merely caught in a cycle of perpetual, restless dreaming. Tonight, as we conclude our journey through the echoes of 100 years, We realize the skyscrapers are not just concrete and steel. They are the physical manifestation of that restless dream. They stand on the bones of Seneca Village, their foundation laid by unseen black labor, their culture fueled by the rhythm of Harlem. Listen now, as the 2 centuries merge into a single quiet heartbeat. This is the city's lullaby, sung by time itself. We stand at the confluence of 1924 and 2024. The sensory shock of the past, the steam. The coal, the manure has faded, replaced by the clean digital pulse of the present. Yet, the core truth of New York remains the same. It is a place built on the ancient energy of aspiration. The city's spirit is defined by its speed. But history shows that this speed has always been an illusion. In 1924, traffic was blocked by a horse-drawn cart. In 2024, it is blocked by gridlock. The constant is the struggle for movement, the physical struggle to cross the island, and the social struggle to climb the economic ladder. The Black history we have traced is the key to understanding this constancy. The African American and diasporic community has always been the primary source of the city's enduring strength. The resilience to survive the frozen winters of the tenements. The genius to create the cultural rhythm, jazz, that defined the SPEAKEASIE is that the courage to demand space. In a city that initially only offered them labor, the mystery of New York is not its complexity, but its simplicity. The enduring human will to survive and create beauty in the face of structural gravity. Let us perform a final synthesis, a rhythmic exchange between the 2 eras, letting the sounds and smells of the past cradle us into the silence of the present. We trade the pungent smell of horse manure on the streets for the acrid fume of the idling taxi, the organic decay swapped for the mechanical stagnation. We trade the loud, violent, percussive sound of the rivet gun on the skyscraper for the soft, automated hum of the glass tower, the public struggle for the private, technological isolation. We trade the soot-stained, obscured stars of the grand central ceiling for the clean, bright, revealed constellations, the promise made visible. But the arduous journey itself, now almost forgotten. The city is a restless giant because it cannot escape the memory of its own labor. Every time a modern commuter takes the train, they are riding over the forgotten tunnels dug by the Sandhogs. Every time a tourist walks across the Great Lawn, they are walking over the hearthstones of Seneca Village. The ghosts are not scary. They are the foundation. The final philosophical question is, does the city ever truly sleep? Perhaps the constant movement, the subways running beneath the schist, the faint hum of electricity in the high-rise steel is the sound of the giant dreaming. The dream of 1924 was one of escape and arrival. The Great Migration poured its hopes into the city, creating Harlem as a literal dream space carved out of segregated reality. The dream of 2024 is one of sustainability and equity. It is the dream of finally living up to the promises that the Statue of Liberty whispered through the gray harbor mist a century ago. The city is a powerful testament to the fact that progress is not linear. It is cyclical, messy, and requires constant rededication. The spirit of the laborer, the artist, and the migrant, the enduring force of the Black New Yorker, is the permanent, electric pulse of the metropolis. As we drift towards rest, we leave the city in its state of perpetual motion, its steel and glass shimmering in the eternal glow. The noise fades, the gridlock stills, and the shadows lengthen one last time. Sleep now, in the shadow of the giants, and remember the whispers behind the door and the rhythmic power of the journey. The city is dreaming, and you are part of its timeless, profound story.